everyone to the Kalamazoo Public Library's program about the Christmas ship and other ghost ships of the Great Lakes. My name is Steve Siebers, and I work at the Washington Square Branch Library, and I'll be your Zoom host this evening. We're really excited to have Shetan Noir with us tonight to share her stories. She is an author and journalist who focuses on the paranormal, cryptozoology, and weird travels. She is the owner of Squatch GQ Magazine Publishing and teaches at Kellogg Community College and Owens Community College. We are recording this program, and there at the end, we will have a question and answer period. So if you can just save your questions to the end, then Shetan will try to answer as much as she can. I will be monitoring the chat, so you can put questions in there. All right, I'll turn it over to you, Shetan.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Hopefully, everybody is, nice and warm and comfortable and ready to hear and learn about some of our more significant ghost ships here on the Great Lakes. Now, certainly the Rouse Simmons, the Christmas tree ship, falls in this category. And I'm going to save her to the end because she is the guest of honor of the lecture tonight. So she'll be at the end. But we're going to start out with some smaller wrecks that, are no less important than the Rouse Simmons, but some that, maybe not a lot of people hear about. And so we're going to start off with the SS Asia. Now, the SS Asia has a few things going against her before she even, becomes a wreck. And that is the fact that her name, the Asia, starts with an A and ends with an A. And according to maritime sailors, this was a huge no-no. So whoever named the ship obviously didn't know that rule, but it said that ships that started with an A or ended with an A were more prone to wrecking and sinking. And unfortunately, her name starts with an A and ends with an A. So the Asia, she actually, she was a 136-foot long ship. And she was sailing, Lake Huron into the Georgian Bay near a place called Lonely Island. And it's called Lonely Island because it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it's probably the last place that you want to be stranded. But out of the 123 people who were aboard her, on the day that she sank on September 14th, 1882, only 2 people survived. So the issue that they had and why they lost so many lives is they had a really hard time with the lifeboats. And in that day, in those days, in that era, lifeboats really were not built to withstand the wintertime gale force activity that we get on the Great Lakes. And, a lot of people will say, well, she sank in September. Well, our Great Lakes are known to start their gale force activity in September and sometimes go as far into, the spring as April with having ice, with having, very strong, fast winds, very high waves. So these lifeboats were really not built to withstand the fury of our Great Lakes action. So only 2 people survived this wreck, and it happened to be a young man and a young woman, and they were able to get onto the shore on Lonely Island, and they used some wreckage from the boat to build a fire, and that's kind of how they survived until people found them, a couple days later. And so now some people might say, well, why do people think this is a ghost ship? Well, it's because in and around Lonely Island, fishermen, hunters, hikers have reported hearing what sounds like a ship wrecking and people yelling and screaming for help. And they search the waters with their flashlight. They go up and down the banks, and there is never anyone that they can see living and breathing, calling out in distress. But they do hear the disembodied voices, the sounds of it, and they do report that this location is actually very rampant with paranormal activity, and they have a lot of this kind of activity happening at Lonely Island in Georgian Bay. So that is one of our first. She was a kind of an oddly built shaped ship too. She was actually very tall, but kind of narrow, in her building. So there were a lot of ships that sailed on the Great Lakes that probably should not have been sailing the Great Lakes, because they weren't built for the type of wave activity, the type of storms that we have here on the Great Lakes. They tried everything from schooners to side paddle ships to freighters, and each one of the lakes, every single one of the lakes, has taken down its fair share of a variety and assortment of different ships. So another ship that we consider a ghost ship at this time is actually one that some people may have heard of, and this is the Griffin. And the Griffin that I'm talking about is the one that LaSalle built. He built it over in the Niagara Falls area, and they really were not shipbuilders. They had an idea of what a ship should look like and how to build it. And so this ship was the Native Americans referred to it as a monstrosity. And as it was carried over land and finally launched into the Great Lakes, the Native American, the shamans and the chiefs were cursing it as it was sailing through the lake systems, and it finally reached the Wisconsin shoreline of Lake Michigan. Every Native American who saw this ship put a curse on it. So it's no wonder that she didn't last too long on the lakes. But as the legend and story goes, LaSalle, he makes it all the way to the Wisconsin side of Lake Michigan. And they have been doing fur trading with different fur traders and posts. And they end up having almost 12,000 pounds of fur pelts. And the decision is made by LaSalle that he and half of his men will take to the land and go along the shoreline and set up more trading posts. And Luke the Dane, his second in command, will go and take the Griffin back, all the way back to Niagara Falls, New York, which is, when you're going from the Wisconsin shoreline of Lake Michigan, that means you have to sail from there all the way through the Straits of Mackinac, all the way down the Huron River, the Detroit River, navigate into Lake Erie, and then navigate even further east until you hopefully find your landmarks that say, hey, we're going in the right direction and we're headed to Niagara Falls area. So that was quite a daunting task in and of itself. But we do know that a few days after Luke the Dane leaves with the Griffin, that a huge storm rises up on Lake Michigan, and they take cover in a tiny little inlet right there on the Upper Peninsula. Now, this is very close to Shishwa Point, and it was named that because it meant only choice. So we do know, as they were sheltering in this little inlet harbor, that there was Native Americans who were sheltering out in their canoes, who eventually went on land and decided that that was a better route. But the Native Americans tried very, very hard to impress upon Luke the Dane that you should wait out this storm because it will sink ships, and certainly had taken many canoes down. And Luke the Dane thought nothing of it, thinking that the Griffin was bigger, stronger ship than any canoe. He, pretty much thought that the Griffin could, withstand the storms on Lake Michigan. Now, to this day, we know that, the storms that come on Lake Michigan are some of the worst recorded for gales and squalls that will ever be reported for maritime history. So he sets off in the Griffin, and that is their fate. They sail off into history. And to this day, we don't really know where they wrecked. In the lakes, we don't know if they're in Lake Michigan. We don't know if they made it over onto the Lake Huron side. The last sighting that we had is the Native American, canoes telling them, hey, wait out the storm, but they didn't. Now, there is another factor that I find quite interesting that comes from the Native American beliefs, and that is that a lot of the lake monster stories talk about, if you were to cross the lakes in your canoe, let's say you had gone on a hunting trip, or you were looking for copper, or you were looking for, different grains, berries, fruit for your tribe. It was said that as long as you only took what you needed or what your tribe needed, the lake monsters would let you cross the surface of the lake, generally with not any issues. It said that you could make a small offering of tobacco, copper, and they would be appeased and they would let you cross the lake. But I can see the Native American belief of, how they saw that LaSalle and his men, or Luke the Dane and his men, were very greedy, because here they had 12,000 pounds of animal pelts that they were hoping to take back to New York to sell off to settle, LaSalle's debts. And by any stretch of the imagination, that's a great sign of greed. And, a lot of the Native Americans looked down on that. So, was it the lake monsters, the great underwater panther, Inabishu, who took them to the depths, or maybe a Native American tribe set their ship on fire? We will never know, because the Griffin is lost to history, and she's sitting on the bottom of one of the lakes somewhere, and that will be her final resting place. Now, the next ship I'm going to talk about is the Ss Kamloops, and of all the ships that have sunk on the Great Lakes and should be haunted, this one should be haunted. Now, the Kamloops, we believe she sank on December 7th, 1924. And she went down with all hands during a violent storm on Lake Superior. Now, Lake Superior, there's an old saying that, goes that Lake Superior never gives up her dead. There is a reason for this, and that is because Lake Superior has such deep depths that when bodies go down with ships, they are in a refrigerated state. The depths of the water is so cold and so deep that no bacteria form, therefore no bloat happens, and the corpses of the sailors do not rise to the surface. They stay where they sank with the ship. Now, on the Kamloops, she is in such a deep depth of water that really the only diving that is done on her is technical dives. And that is usually done by people working for the state who are doing maritime archaeological dives to see what the condition of the wreck is, see if anything's leaking off of the ship, and seeing, if anything's damaging the ship. Anchor strikes are a major concern. So when these divers go down to the Kamloops, they are almost 1,000 feet underwater. So you're not getting to the surface anytime soon. And on the SS Kamloops, there is a corpse. Now, this corpse has been called Grandpa. He's been called Old Whitey. They're not quite sure if he was a crew member, maybe the cook. Cooks were usually the last ones off the ship because they were down in the galley. And if a ship's taking on water, generally chances are they get stuck inside the ship, whereas everybody else is up on top of the deck and can make for the lifeboats or put on a life preserver and hope that they're rescued. Cooks are usually trapped inside, and that's why a lot of times not the captain, but the cook goes down with the ship. But back to the Kamloops. So there is a corpse on the Kamloops, and I want people who aren't scuba divers, who don't do underwater, diving. If you've ever been walking through a dark room or a house, and suddenly somebody comes around the corner, and it scares you. So imagine you're 1,000 feet underwater, and as you're swimming through this wreck, the wake that you create with your fins and your scuba gear, well, that animates Grandpa. And eventually Grandpa will come out and he looks like he's interacting with you because of the wave activity. And this has scared more than one scuba diver who has gone down to check on this wreck. So it is well stated that there is a corpse on the ship. Now, a lot of people ask, why don't they bring up the corpses? And that is because due to maritime history, you're not allowed to move human remains from a shipwreck. That is actually a graveyard. And the only time a corpse is removed is if the family requests that to be done. But most families believe that if their loved one sank on the ship and went to their watery grave, then that is their final resting place. And that is where they will stay because they want them to be where their final moments were. And so that is why we do not take, human remains off of shipwrecks, especially in the Great Lakes area. There is maritime law, national, state, and federal laws that apply to this, that protect these wreck sites. Even the Edmund Fitzgerald has human remains that have been observed around the wreck, and she is off limits except for people doing the technical dives down to see how she's maintaining, if she's leaking anything, what kind of state of preservation she is in. But the water is so cold at these depths that really nothing really deteriorates. It kind of preserves it, and there's no salt water, so it's not corrosive. So even wooden ships that have sank in Lake Superior, the timbers are still there. Human remains are still there. We are still, these things will be there probably for the next 50 or 100 years because of the coldness of the depth of water. So I would say if there was any ghost ship or shipwreck that should be haunted, it is probably the Kamloops, just because of her passenger who's still on the decks or below decks as of today. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. So the next ship that I'm going to talk about is the Augusta of Oswego. So the Augusta sank on September 8th, 1860. Now, most of our shipwrecks do happen between the 1700s and the 1900s. This was before a lot of the automated, maritime gadgetry that they have on ships, you know, the navigational equipment, radar, sonar, communications. For a very long time, the only way to navigate the ships was with a hand-drawn map, a compass, and hopefully you had some type of lights on board your ship at night so that other people could see you and avoid you. Now, a lot of times ships did not do this. So the Augusta, she was running without lights. And unfortunately, the second mate who had been put in charge of the ship that night waited over 30 minutes to make the wrong decision. He waited 20 minutes to turn the Augusta into the path of the Lady Elgin, which meant that they went right through the Lady Elgin. The Lady Elgin was a side wheel steamer ship. The Augusta was more of a schooner. So basically like a knife going through a loaf of bread. When the Augusta hit the Lady Elgin, it just ripped right through the cabins. People were sleeping in these cabins. They had no warning. A lot of people died from this. The hull, the guardrails, the side panel were all destroyed. And then the Augusta proceeds to sail off because they, the second mate and the captain, now believe that, oh, their ship is damaged worse than the Lady Elgin. So they leave all the passengers on board the Lady Elgin to their fate. And so as this is going on, a gale force storm comes up. So many of the people who were on board were just jumping overboard. And they were trying to salvage whatever they could to, and anything that was buoyant. Like 18 people made it to the lifeboats. 14 people created a raft. Another 60 passengers grabbed onto anything that was floating cargo-wise, and hoping that they could float into the shoreline. The rest of the people, they didn't make it. So this was, you know, a huge maritime disaster. And it kind of brought about the law that said, you know, hey, if you're sailing at night, you really need to have running lights. And there was even a term that captains and crew came up with, and that's the lights are bright. And it would be one crewman's job at night to walk around and polish all the lantern lenses and make sure they were all lit so that other ships could see their location on the lake. And that crew member's job was to report to the captain that the lights were bright, meaning that yes, every single light, you know, lantern is on and the lenses are polished and people can see us. So, you know, this law should have been in effect, you would think, you know, when people started sailing the lakes at night, but it took a couple of very bad maritime disasters for this to actually, you know, come into place. Now, the Augusta after that, it's said that she turns into a hoodoo ship. And a hoodoo ship is basically kind of like, well, you know, being cursed. They call it a black cat ship. You know, they could not find any port to call home on Lake Michigan because people knew what the ship looked like. Even after they painted it a different color and renamed it, the Colonial Cook, people still knew that it was this ship. So the captain, Nelson Mallett, decided, you know, after being chased out of every port, to the point where people were trying to set his ship on fire because they hated him, they hated the ship, and they didn't think that due justice was, you know, done to them. You know, a lot of people thought that the captain should have been reprimanded harder than what he was, because it came out that the second mate was drinking the night of the accident. So he eventually takes to the Atlantic coast, sails up and down the Atlantic coast for a while, and then he's still having issues, but not with people in the harbors. He's having a lot of issues with keeping a crew, because his crew keep reporting the same thing over and over again, and that is they keep hearing people crying for help in the water next to the ship. They can also hear what sounds like people trying to climb up on the ship. And this freaks out the crew so bad that they're like, no, we're not going to do anything with this. So the colonial cook finally grounds itself, and she sinks. She's broken apart on the Erie Shoal in Lake Erie. But Captain Mallett, he goes on to sail another ship. Now he's back in the Great Lakes area this time. And now he is on a ship called the Mojave. And as he's sailing this ship around, it's coming up on the 4th anniversary of the sinking of the Lady Elgin. And wouldn't you know, as fate would have it, with Captain Nelson Mallett as her captain, sailing her, the Mojave actually sinks where the Lady Elgin sank on the 4th anniversary of the Lady Elgin sinking. So a cursed boat, a cursed captain, and the reason that we have maritime law stating, yeah, you have to have running lights at night on your ship so that other ships know you're there. Normally, all they would have is a bell, and anybody who's been on the Great Lakes, with the wind, with the waves, hearing a little bell ringing is not really much of a warning of where another ship is in proximity to you. So this was a major thing with getting that, law instated. So another ship that I'm going to talk about, this one actually, she's both a hoodoo ship, but there's a lot of paranormal activity that happened after the event that she was involved in. So in the Chicago area, one of the worst maritime disasters to ever happen on the Great Lakes happened with a ship named the Eastland. Now, the Eastland, she had actually been sailing the lakes for about 10 years before this accident happened. And she was actually very well known for listing and, trying to capsize. Now, unfortunately, on the day that this happened, the Eastland had been hired by a company to take its workers, all of them, to a picnic over on the Michigan side of Lake Michigan. And so 2 ships had been hired, but because the Eastland was the newer ship, a lot of people wanted to be on that ship because they thought she was in better condition. The owners of the ship knew that she was capable of capsizing, that she listed with pretty much like, it didn't take a whole lot to make her list. So all these company employees board this ship. And they are very excited. We have parents, we have children, grandparents, and everybody wants a rail side viewing area. So just like, we've seen with Black Friday and, stadium events, concerts, people rushed aboard and they rushed immediately to the opposite deck, which started the Eastland to very rapidly rock to that far side. Now, the engineer who's inside the ship, he's trying to balance it. So he floods the opposite side of the ship with ballast. Well, people, we're talking 1,000 people. People started to panic, so they started rushing over back onto the other side of the ship that they had entered on, which made the Eastland rock back the other way. So the engineer, panicking now, fills both, but it's at this point that he can't balance the ship, and people are panicking. They're rushing back and forth across the deck of the ship, and she capsizes, taking many of the people under the water with her. There were some people who were able to jump off the deck of the ship as this happened and swim away, and they got rescued, but a lot of the people didn't. So almost every building along the dock, along the port, was used as a makeshift morgue. And the sad thing was, a lot of the people were families. So when a whole family is drowned underwater, it took a couple of weeks to verify who everyone was, because they had to wait for people to come out of the city, out of state, to come in and identify their loved ones. And that took a long time to do. So it's said that every, once in a while, people will hear someone crying for help in the different, little areas of the port there. And people will rush to, see if somebody's fallen in. They can never actually find anyone who is drowning. And a lot of this is, thought to be coming from the fact that the Eastland, she capsized and she took so many souls with her. After she capsized, she was rightened, and the owners very quickly sold her off. They actually sold her to the U.S. Government, and she was used for target practice after that. They did rename her, and but she still, they just basically set her up for target practice, and that was all she was used for after that. But the Eastland, the way that she was built, she was very tall, very narrow, and this was not a good design at all for the Great Lakes, especially a ship that was going to be used as a passenger ship. It really was not water worthy or passenger worthy at that point. So the next ship I'm going to talk about is from up in the Lake Superior. That's where we believe her final resting place is. And she is called the Ss Bananak Bird. Now, back in the days when she sank, we believe she sank somewhere around November 21st, 1902. It was not uncommon that a crew of as young as 16 would be hired, and captains could be hired, if they were 20-ish, you could be hired as captain. So imagine this big freighter being piloted by your teenage sons. Yeah, that kind of sends a shiver through everybody. We do know that as she was setting sail, a couple of different ship captains observed her, and they didn't think anything of it, because as they were making their way across the lake, they were watching her disappear in and out of fog banks. And so, they think that, she was doing fine. But then after a couple of days, nobody has heard from them. They haven't made it to their next port of call. And nobody really has heard anything from the crew of 21 that were on board of her. And they, her last accountability was when she was leaving Fort Williams, Ontario. So people who saw her, coming in and out of the fog, they are not sure if they were actually seeing the real ship or if they were seeing the ghost ship of her. But it is said that on foggy, snowy days, that ships that are going to wreck in a certain location encounter the Bananak Bird. Now, the story goes that a steamer ship, the Walter A. Hutchinson, was experiencing some stormy weather. And because it was a steamer ship, the captain, he decided to play it safe. And he was kind of hugging close to shore. He wanted to stay within eyesight of the shore because his hope was if they did wreck, at least if they launched the light boats, his men would know where the shoreline was and hopefully be able to make it to shore. Take some, firewood with them and maybe some hot coals, get a fire going on shore. And then, maybe they could survive the night and signal for passing ships to rescue them the next day. And so that was their game plan. Now, as they are making their way along the shoreline, here comes a freighter out of nowhere barreling down towards them. And the crew on the steamer ship, the Hutchinson, are doing everything that they can to signal to the other ship, hey, we're here. We're on this course. Could you please move? And they do this to no avail. So finally, at the last second, it's almost a game of chicken at this point. The captain of the Hutchinson veers off into the lake and nearly misses colliding with this oncoming freighter. So at this point, him and his crew are giving some very suggestive hand gestures to the other crew and calling them the colorful curse words of the day. And they get past the freighter and they're like, what idiots, how reckless are they? So the captain of the Hutchinson once again gets his ship on the course that he had, hoping that, this will help save his ship. But now he's kind of starting to flounder in the water and it's getting kind of perilous. And the next thing they know, here comes this freighter at them again. And the captain of the Hutchinson's like, there's no way. There is no way that freighter went past us, circled around us, and is now straight on a path for us again within the time that we last saw it. It's just impossible. So at this point, the Hutchinson, they decide, okay, we're going out into the lake. We're just going to take our chances because we don't know if this captain's drunk or he has a vendetta. We just have no clue as to what his issues are. So we're just going to avoid him. So as they veer off into the lake, this time as the freighter goes past, the captain and the crew make sure that they see the name on the boat because they're going to report them. And as the ship goes past, a cold chill goes down everybody's spine because in bold letters along the side of the ship reads the Ss Bananak Bird. Now, it isn't too much after when the Bananak Bird passes them that the crew on the Hutchinson hear a loud explosion. And as they're looking back to the water and stunned, they realize that that's probably where the Bananak Bird crashed into a rocky outcropping and sank. And if they had not veered off into the lake, that probably would have been their fate. And so it's said that on foggy, snowy nights, the Bananak Bird tries to force other ships away from where it sank and hoping to save the crew who went down with the ship. So we've got some time left, so I'm going to talk about the ship that everybody came to hear about, and that is the Rouse Simmons. Now, the Rouse Simmons, she's famously called the Christmas tree ship. She wasn't the only Christmas tree ship, but she's the most famous of the Christmas tree ships. And this had to do with Captain Schumann and his family. He was referred to as Captain Santa, and that's what we're going to call him tonight, is Captain Santa, being it is the holiday season. Now, the Rouse Simmons, she was well past her prime, and she probably should not have been out on the lakes in her condition at her age. Her captain knew this, her crew knew this, and certainly the insurance companies knew this, because in those times, the insurance companies would stop insuring boats the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thanksgiving, Thursday. And they did this because in the insurance company's minds, no ship should be in these waters where there's ice, there's gale force winds, there's storms, and they should all be tucked into their nice, docking areas and set for the, the winter season. And so no ships were insured after that, Tuesday right before Thanksgiving. So really, Captain Santa, he was kind of pressing his luck, and his ship's crew told him multiple times, maybe let's just do half a load. But Captain, Santa, he had, some debts to pay. So he made sure there was as many trees as they could fit on that ship, the Rouse Simmons. And, there is some variance, but we believe there was between 8,000 and 10,000 Christmas trees on that last voyage. So they were sailing from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan down along the Wisconsin borders, and their final destination would be Chicago. So each port that Captain Santa and the Rouse Simmons would sail into, they would sell off a certain portion of the Christmas trees. And the reason he was called Captain Santa, one, he had a white beard, but two, he decorated the ship's mast with a lit up Christmas tree that would be in lights, and then there would be a sign saying Christmas trees for sale cheap in Christmas lights. And he would sail into port, and he was known for selling the Christmas trees for very cheap prices. So a lot of poor families, they looked forward to seeing Captain Santa and the Rouse Simmons, because it meant that, even if they couldn't afford a expensive Christmas, they could at least afford a Christmas tree and decorate it. And so a lot of families, would show up at the ports, and they would wait, all day for Captain Santa to sail in, because that was their chance to get a, really cheap Christmas tree. So we do know that they sailed into a couple different ports. And I was doing this presentation about a year ago, and there was a gentleman who was watching, and he said that his uncles had once been crew on the Rouse Simmons. Well, come to find out, they were on the crew the same journey when she went missing. But fortunately for the uncles, they had gotten into the Wisconsin port, which was their home port, and they were not prepared for the winter weather that was blowing up on Lake Michigan that day. So knowing that they probably had at least 2 more days on the lake, they begged Captain Santa to let them go home to their home port and get their winter clothes, their nice wool gloves, their wool coats, nice wool, knitted, caps to keep themselves warm. And so Captain, as they pulled into port, Captain Santa said, okay, you have a half an hour, but if you're not back in a half an hour, I'm sailing off and you're not getting paid. So the brothers were like, oh, no problem, we can do that. So they hail a cab and they start making their way to their house. Now, unfortunately, this was a cab driver who was new to their hometown. And so every road he seemed to turn on was the wrong one, even though the brothers were telling him, no, turn down this road. There's construction. There was just a lot of things being an obstacle. So it took about 25 minutes for the brothers to get to their house, get their belongings. They're rushing back out of the house, yelling goodbye to their loved ones that are there. They hail another cab and they're like, we will give you extra money if you get us back to the docks within 5 minutes. So they get back to the docks as fast as they can. And as they're running down the docks, they are just fit to be tied because they can see, well, Captain Santa kept his, his promise. He's all the way out into the harbor and he's sailing away. And so the brothers are kicking their feet and they're cursing and they're like, now we've got to figure out a way to get down to the next port before he gets there so that we can get back on the ship and tell him we were just, below decks, maintaining something or taking care of something. Maybe he'll let it slide. Well, it's in between that home port where the two brothers got off and Two Rivers, Wisconsin, that the storm starts to overtake the Rouse Simmons and they lose their lifeboat. So at some point, Captain Santa, he does write a message in the bottle and throws it overboard. And he basically says his goodbyes to everybody. And he says, we did lose the lifeboat. We lost 2 crew members and, our fate is pretty much sealed at this point. Now, a lot of people, they were within view of a lighthouse. The lighthouse keeper was sending rescue to them, but he was losing track of them in the mist and snow that was coming up on Lake Michigan. And a lot of people ask me, why didn't the crew just jump off the ship and swim for it? And the answer to this question is, at this point, as the storm was overtaking them, the Christmas trees that were lashed still to the deck broke free and were now in the waves around the ship, and they essentially become battering rams. So if they're breaking apart the ship itself and battering it, then that's not going, a human being in that is not going to fare very well. These logs are coming at you, with brute strength, and you're going to end up beaten up pretty badly. So we do know that, the Rouse Simmons, she sinks in this area and she takes most of the Christmas trees below deck with her and she sinks. And it's not until, everybody's, in the other harbors, in the other port of calls are, they keep coming to the docks every day and they're wondering, where is the Rouse Simmons? Well, it's not until Christmas trees start washing up on shore that people start putting it together, that one of the Christmas tree ships went down. And then when the Rouse Simmons never comes to Chicago, her final destination, they pretty much, understand that it's the Rouse Simmons who went down. Now, a couple of years after that, there are fishermen in the area and they pull up in their nets a wallet. And inside the wallet, there are oil-skinned newspaper articles about the Christmas tree ship, about Captain Santa. And they're pretty sure this was Captain Santa's wallet. So they do eventually find the Rouse Simmons. She's sitting about 300 feet underneath water. And she still has Christmas trees with some of their, their boughs still on them in her decks. And She's still sitting there to this day. Now, after the Rouse Simmons sank, Captain Santa's wife and daughters decided that they wanted to honor this tradition. So they continued on for many, many years afterwards, I believe 20 years afterwards, of going up to the UP, getting Christmas trees, bringing them back down and selling them. And it's still honored to this day by the U.S. Coast Guard with the cutter ship, the Mackinac. They will bring in Christmas trees into the Chicago area on the cutter ship, the Mackinac, and sell them or give them away to less fortunate families. So to this day, there is still the tradition of the Christmas tree ships, just now not the Rouse Simmons. Now, some people ask, well, why is she in the ghost ship category? Well, it's said that in that stretch between Escanaba and Two Rivers, Wisconsin, that on stormy nights, foggy nights, people will occasionally see a very badly battered ship trying to make progress along the, down the lake shore. And it's when you see the ship that you should really start getting off the water. And if you start to smell fresh cut balsam Christmas trees, that's another clue that the weather is going to turn very, very bad, and that you should probably get your ship into harbor before it goes under the waves. So that's my presentation on the Christmas tree ships and the ghost ships of the Great Lakes. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat room, and we will answer, or I will answer them from there.
I don't see one coming up, but
Okay.
I do have a question.
Sure.
It's that you teach sometimes at Kellogg Community College and
Yes.
Owens Community College. Do you
Yes.
teach a paranormal class, or do you teach
Yes.
something different?
Oh, yes. So at both campuses, for Kellogg Community College, both the Battle Creek and Hastings campus, I teach legends and folklore of the Great Lakes, which I cover the shipwrecks, the hauntings, lake monsters, pirates, all that kind of stuff in the course. And I also teach a course on the cryptozoology of North America at that both campuses too. So yes, I do teach. Those are my two courses that I teach at Kellogg Community College. And so if you're in the Battle Creek area and you enjoyed this presentation, sign up. We will be doing classes again in the springtime there. And so I will be offering those, I believe, April or May of 2022. So feel free to check those out.
All right. And we do have a couple questions now.
Okay.
One is, do you have a website where you sell your books?
So all of my books can be found on Amazon. I have Lake Monsters and Odd Creatures of the Great Lakes available. I have Mothman and Other Flying Creatures of the Midwest. There is a children's book where it's my little dog, and there are actual pictures of her as she goes and tries to find Bigfoot around our yard. It's very cute. She dresses up in all these little outfits. I am working on a book for the paranormal history of the Great Lakes, but I also run a magazine company, and I write for 6 different magazines in that company. So that kind of keeps my writing occupied. So.
All right. And then another question is, have you ever experienced a ghost ship personally?
No, I have not seen one personally. So it's, sometimes you have to be in the right place at the right time. And often a lot of these ships, the ghost ships are seen when it's very bad weather on the lake. And I, for one, it's pretty to look at from inside your car sitting, a ways from the beach. But I don't go out. I don't go out in the Great Lakes unless they are perfectly calm. And they are, there's no storm activity in sight.
And you're not doing any scuba diving and
Um,
seeing old grandpa or whatever.
no, that is very much a technical dive. I will be starting my scuba diving certification
All right.
this winter, but I'm just looking at doing recreational dives. I have some friends in the Lake Champlain area that want me to go help them look for champs. So I think I might be headed back out there this summer.
All right, we have another question, but first starts out with a thank you so much for the presentation. What got you interested in this topic?
Oh my gosh. So the Great Lakes are they're very fascinating because they are such huge bodies of water, but they have personalities of their own. And there is just something supernatural and paranormal about the lakes themselves. And there's so many different aspects of it. There's the shipwrecks themselves. There are UFO activity. There's lake monsters. There's the ghost ships. All of these, anomalies that are just, present with the Great Lakes, and they are just very fascinating to research.
All right. And then we have another one that says, my daughter was watching with me and she is wondering if you know how many ships have sunk in the Great Lakes.
So a low estimate would be 20,000.
Wow.
And that's starting, that's going back to the very first Native American canoes that, came across the lake all the way up to the great big super laker, freighters and yachts. So, and then, I say a low estimate of 20,000 because a lot of times personal watercraft, people have accidents, they go missing and nobody ever knows what happened to them. Because if the ship sinks before anybody can rescue them or, pull them from the water, then there's no one left, to tell the tale of where they sank, what happened. So I would say 20,000 is a bare minimum.
All right. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Do you have any last thing you want to say before we wrap up?
Well, just, thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And I would love to come back in the future and do some more presentations for you. I have a long list of things that I like to talk about. So, and they're all paranormal, they're all cryptozoology. So if you liked what I talked about tonight, definitely, you'll like what I talk about for other presentations.
All right. Thanks, Shetan. Thanks for joining us and sharing your research and stories. And yeah, and also to everyone who joined us, thanks for joining us this evening and have a good night.
Thank you.